Now let's take a look at some of the reasons behind the victory of the United States in this war. What were some of the weaknesses of the Mexican Republic during this time that contributed to their loss in the Mexican-American War? Some scholars argue the theory that the reason for the U.S. victory was because the United States was way more united than was Mexico, right? And that there was a stronger feeling or sense of nationalism in the U.S. than there was in Mexico. These scholars would argue that in Mexico, politicians were heavily divided. There was also divisions between the classes in Mexico. And there wasn't really a strong sense of nationalism. But in our reading, Peter Guardino makes a different argument. Yes, he does admit that there were divisions in Mexico, but there were also divisions in the United States. He will argue that there was a strong nationalistic sense in Mexico during this time. It wasn't so much that they were divided, it was that Mexico was in a really unstable condition in terms of politics and economics, and that was the reason why Mexico lost the Mexican-American War. So let's take a look at Guardino's argument. First off, during the war, the Mexican army lacked a lot of the necessities that were needed to have a victory, right? You have to have the proper equipment, right? You have to have guns, ammo. You also have to have clothes, right? Especially if you're out there in the elements, marching for long periods of time. If you don't have enough cover, then you're at risk. You also have soldiers that didn't have food, right? And that's huge. You're fighting on an empty stomach. And so these were many disadvantages that the Mexican army had to deal with during the war itself. On top of this, the Mexican economy was not in good shape before the war took place. After the War for Independence in Mexico, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, you will see that many aspects of the Mexican economy were in shambles. The mining industry, for one, many mines were destroyed. The people who managed the mines were often killed. So in many cases, the mining industry was in terrible shape, and this was a huge source of income for the Spanish government, and would have been a big source of income for the Mexican government once they gained independence, but the mines weren't in shape to produce as much silver as they had in the past, right? And so they needed that silver, and it wasn't there because the mines were in shambles. At the same time, you have agriculture not producing as much as it could have because of the War of Independence in Mexico. Many haciendas were destroyed and burned, animals killed, and so you don't have a lot of food, and so because of scarcity, there were very high prices for food. A lot of poverty in Mexico at this time after the Independence War. So in the early Mexican Republic, a lot of people were struggling, and so if there was disunity, it's because of people living in extreme poverty, right? Many people living in poverty. On top of this, you have the Mexican government depending in many ways on loans from foreign countries. And so a large part of revenue that the Mexican government is bringing in has to go to paying back these loans. And so they're not able to really rebuild their industries and get their economy growing. They have to pay back all of these loans. And so you see a lot of struggling economically in Mexico before the war even takes place. So when it comes to the war, and eventually the U.S. will set up a naval blockade, meaning that they'll set up ships around the coasts, around the ports of Mexico, and not allow goods to get in. That is going to hurt the Mexican government too. Why? Because, well, yeah, they're not able to get in fresh supplies, but also they're not able to bring in revenue from taxes on imports. Okay, and so that's a lack of revenue to help support the war effort. On top of this, Mexico is also experiencing a lot of political instability leading up to the war. In the early years of the Mexican Republic, there were a number of revolutions that took place, presidents that were overthrown, military coups, rebellions by the people in several different areas and regions that had to be put down. And so really there was a lot of political instability even before the war took place. And so it would be hard to really consolidate your forces and have a concentrated resistance against the United States if you're so politically unstable.